what's going on, everybody? My name is Beck. I'm an instructor here at 343 Labs, and welcome to the first week and the first edition of Stuck in the House Wednesdays with me, Beck, here on 343 Labs TV. Now, we have a bunch of amazing different shows and segments happening almost every day of the week, so, tune in for those. We have Claire Lim on Mondays. We have John Selway, Techno Legend, on Tuesdays. And we have Abe Duque, I believe, on Saturdays or Fridays. I'm sorry. Check the website. Doing some Bitwig stuff, which is super cool. He's one of the first, actually certified Bitwig trainers. Anyhow, what I'm going to be teaching and focusing on is house music. Now, I have to say that I'm broadcasting right now from New York City, and for those of you, who are tuning in from around the world or around the country, I do just have to say that, I want to say that we're all in solidarity with what's going on right now, and it's auspicious in some sense that we're doing house music today because, the history of house music is marginalized people coming together to dance and be as one in a community where no one is judged and everyone is equal, and that's the type of world that we need to be building right now and focusing on building. And, house music is a small but meaningful vehicle that over time has, helped achieve that. And so I think it's a really, cool thing that we're able to do this today. And I'm very, honored for all of you who are, joining in. And now, with that being said, this is going to be a 4-week program. And so what I'm going to be doing is each week we're going to be focusing on a different kind of topic. And so this first week today, this first stream is going to be really just focusing on the fundamentals of house music. What is it that makes the genre tick? What are some of the things that almost every house track has in common, And it's important to recognize that there are tons of different genres and stuff in house music. We got, I guess, normal house, classic house, right? Deep house, which also, by the way, no one knows what that means at this point. At one point, it meant Mr. Fingers, Larry Heard, a very specific style of sound. But at this point, deep house sort of is just associated with something a little bit heavy and darker and grooving and maybe a little bit more stripped back. We got tech house, we got all kinds of different stuff. And so what I'm just going to do is try to focus on building the style of house music that I love while also showing the different types of possibilities that you have, but also making sure that we're focusing on the fundamentals that pretty much cross over between all of these different styles. So anyway, with that being said, let's jump right in. All right, so back when house music first started, one of the two things that really defined the genre were the 909 drum machine from Roland and sampling disco records and classic soul records. So in terms of starting out making house music, the number one thing that I do is I just jump right into my 909 kit. All right, so I'm going to drag that on to a MIDI track. And what I want to do is I want to, using this 909 kit, I want to focus on, just the basic positioning of groove elements in a standard house music groove. Now, this might be a little bit redundant for some of you. For others, maybe this will be a little bit eye-opening. Either way, I'm hoping that we can kind of, have stuff that is, on the one hand, fairly basic and straightforward, but on the other hand, going to be very helpful for people of all skill levels that are tuning in. So, of course, right, the number one thing we got going on in house music is a kick drum on each of the quarter notes. So first I'll just make this short little loop. So that's always going to be the starting point, right? That's the fundamental key element of not only house music, but pretty much all dance music. Now, some people might think the next key element would be like a clap, but it's actually not. It's the hi-hat. And I'll explain why in a second. Right? The key with house music is that you're trying to get people to dance, right? And keep moving. And the thing that keeps people moving is rhythmic juxtaposition. And what I mean by that is rhythms that are actually not only based in, note values. So like this is what we would call an eighth note rhythm, right? It's very simple. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But it's also important to understand that rhythm is not only a note measurement, but it also is a actual tonal component. So we have a deep sound in the kick being responded to by a brighter sound that's also thinner, right, in frequency. And so this is what creates that sense of motion. So yes, the clap will come next and is, very important. But really, this is your bread and butter in house music. In fact, adding and taking away the clap is like one trick that you can use to really, play with the sense of groove and rhythm. I like to think of the clap as being something that grounds the track in the groove. And when you don't have the clap in, it's sort of just like flying forward. Now, even in this basic kit right here, there are a couple important things we have to talk about in terms of the sound choice, right? So there's a difference between using a clap that's long like that and then a clap that would be shorter, like this. Right? For obvious reasons, one of them is just like feels like it's right in front of you. And this one feels like it's way out in space, which is cool. But the other thing is that there's actually a subtle difference in the feeling of the rhythm when you have something that has a long release versus a short release. Because when we hear the clap with this long release, we're actually like feeling the rhythm of the entire release. So we're focusing a lot on the downbeat of the clap. Whereas when we have a short release time, it actually brings us right up back into the hi-hat a little bit more. So for my taste, I'm going to use a shorter release clap. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to turn down these closed hi-hats a little bit. So that's your, basic, no BS, run-of-the-mill house music beat. Now, if you want to start getting a little bit more interesting with it and start wanting to create rhythms beyond this basic structure, there's a couple of small things that you can do that will immediately make it more interesting, right? So right now we have our grid, right, our quantized, our piano roll on 16th notes. So each of these little squares, right, represents a 16th note. Now, the current groove elements are only on eighth notes, right? So the core groove of house music is an eighth note groove, right? Right here. Just this is your simple, like we said before, bread and butter, right? That's just how it works. And make no mistake about it, you could 100% make a dope track with only this groove. And we might even start off by actually doing that. But first, I want to explore how you can kind of make more interesting grooves first. So right off the bat, you can just be using these kind of intervening 16th notes, around the kick and the hi-hat to spice up the sense of feeling and throw off the groove a little bit more, right? To create what we call syncopation. So I'll just start off by doing this right here. And I'll repeat it again right there. Let's listen to what that sounds like. Right, so that has a distinctly different feeling And also, there's a nice kind of symmetry to the division of the groove, right? The first half is, as you can see, 1 2 1, and the second half is 1 2 1. So what if we were to change that and only have it be 1 2 1 and then 1 1? That has a distinctly different feeling than if we have both of these going. Because what effectively happens is now it feels like we're just looping half a bar since we repeat this, whereas this time it feels like we actually have a whole bar, right? So I'm not saying one is correct or incorrect, but I'm just pointing out, that there's going to be an immediately different feel once you start playing with these more syncopated notes. Now, something that's cool to do maybe would be to drag this into a different spot of syncopation. So I really only think in house music, right? I only think of two main spots for syncopation. It's that spot between the first kick drum and the hi-hat and between the second kick drum and the hi-hat, right? So in these little areas. Now that's cool, right? And it has a little bit more of a sense of flavor and variation than purely having it be like that. But again, the more notes that you add, the more you're actually stressing a divergence from the basic pattern, which is right? So it's purely up to you and purely, about taste. But I personally like to keep things a little bit more simple. That being said, there's one basic way to even, keeping a little bit more, I wouldn't call this complex, but it's a little more, varied like this, that you can actually make it feel a little bit more alive. And so that brings us to our first important topic here, which is velocity. And we don't have to spend a lot of time on this because it's pretty straightforward. Essentially, for those of you who don't know what velocity is, right, is it's the pressure of the note. In other words, it's how much volume is generated when you hit that note. Now, this is meant to exist to imitate feel from live playing and stuff like that. And so what we also can use it to do is to take electronic drums, which sound, very static and fake right now, and make them feel a little bit more alive. And so I'm only going to reduce the velocity of the syncopated notes. And all of a sudden, right, we get a way more sense of a kind of swingy feel, right? Not literally swings. We'll go over that in a second. But it kind of makes the groove, dip and pop a little bit more. And that's the other thing about rhythm, right? So rhythm is notes, tones, and then also what you might call volume or velocity, right? So the same instrument, but played in a different way, right? So if I go clap, clap, that's one thing. What if I go clap, clap, right? Right, you get a different kind of relationship and feeling from the groove. So it's important that you use velocity whenever you're programming hi-hats especially. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as a starting point for our little house beat. And what I want to explore next is what we call swing. And so there's a couple of different ways that you can apply swing. As I'm sure some of you may be aware, in Ableton, right, we have what's called the groove pool. And what the groove pool is it allows us to basically choose, where are my grooves? Let's see. Sorry, just give me a second. That's weird. I don't know where my grooves are. Oh, there they are. Okay. So, there we go. Swing and groove. All right. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain fart there. All right. So, as some of you know, in Ableton, we have what's called our groove pool. And for those of you that don't know, right, you access it by coming to packs and then your core library, and you come into swing and groove. And what this actually does is it takes a feel, a rhythmic feel, and allows us to apply it to any type of loop, drums, audio, bass, anything that we want to add a little bit more of flavor to. So I'm going to come ahead and go into my MPC, and I'm going to look at a 16th note swing. So something that's really important to understand here is that the number 8 versus the number 16 is going to distinctly change the way that it swings your beat. Now, what is swing? I'm saying that word, and some of you might be like, what the hell is he talking about? So swing, very, very simply, is when you take certain notes and you shift them out of time on purpose. So what happened, quicker way to maybe do that more effective would be like that. And so what it does is it actually makes the track kind of propel or slightly pause and then speed up. And so I'll show you what this sounds like just by shortening those. Right? Versus. So that's like a very much more standard kind of house groove, and it has a little bit more flavor and feel to it. But now you can do it the way that I just did it, right? Which is to just shorten the notes a little bit, and you basically get that. But what you also could do, I'm going to shorten these notes anyway. So this isn't changing anything, right? This is changing the note length, whereas before I was changing the starting point of the note. And what I can do is I can click on some of these grooves, and it'll, using this little woodblock sound, show me the type of rhythm and style it's going to apply. So I like that one, this kind of galloping feel. So I'm going to go ahead and load that up onto my groove. So I just come down, click here, and I click that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit quantize to 100%, timing to 100%. So as you can see, when I hit commit, it shifts these note times, these notes a little bit over. Now the thing is that that's like a really subtle one, as it turns out. I actually want to go for a more aggressive feel. So I'm going to hit Command Z, and I'm going to go and look for a different groove. So let's see, which one did I have over here? Double down 60. Let's try double down 70. See how that goes. Yeah, that one I can kind of feel a little bit more. It like pops off the beat a little bit. I'm going to hit commit. And you can see this now shifted it more towards where I had it in time anyway. Now, one thing you'll also notice that it made all of these other notes a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and shorten those. Not because it really matters, but more just out of a sense of OCD. And so what's cool now is that whenever I load up a new track, all I have to do is go into my groove pool, and I can click right there, and I can apply that groove to the new thing that I'm adding. All right? So there's a couple of more things now that I want to go over in terms of building the basic groove in house music, building the basic beat, right? And the next thing we're going to talk about is the snare drum. So I like that one. Now you can use the snare a lot of the times to accentuate this little shift that's going on with the hi-hat. And what we can do is with the snare is it allows us to accentuate different parts of the groove. And this is an idea that over the course of these 4, episodes of the 343 Labs TV that we're doing here, this Stuck in the House thing, what I'm going to be doing is talking so much about accentuation, right? And that you can use different elements at different times to change the feeling of something that seemingly is the same, right? So what I want to talk about first is or demonstrate first, is how placing these snares in different locations will change the sense of feel and timing a little bit and emphasis. So first, I'm just going to emphasize these swung syncopated moments. So that's one feel. Now the other way to do it is also maybe I'll accentuate the upbeat. Right, so that actually sticks out a little bit more, right? Because we're like really being like, okay, that spot on the upbeat. And again, I can use velocity to make it a little bit more subtle. And if I wanted to, even because there are no rules in music, maybe I could go like this and have this snare be really, really subtle. Now, in terms of Ableton stuff for 1 second, if I'm not feeling enough of a change in velocity between these two, right, I can come into my drum rack and make sure that my velocity is up. There we go, my volume to velocity ratio. So it can be located in different places depending on the type of setting you have. So I'm going to turn this to 100%. And what this means is that now my snare is going to respond very drastically to changes in velocity. Right, so now we get a little bit more sense of like glide and groove instead of like really those static snares. We can hear right, so this is kind of almost what we would call a ghost note. It's so subtle that you barely perceive it, but it's there, and it changes the sense of the groove a lot. So even if I silence this hi-hat, you'll be able to hear that snare. And especially since we have this hi-hat there anyway, it kind of layers together. So one thing you can also use the snares to do, right, is you don't have to have them overlap with any of the notes. So I could use one of these snares to actually just, you know, change up the feel of the groove overall. So maybe one thing I'll do is I'll copy this, come right over here, paste, right, just so I get that same groove value, and we'll see what this sounds like. So that's a little bit much in terms of doing it every time. But what if I were only to do it every other time? Right, so actually I'll just come in here, duplicate the region, and just go like that. And now let's loop this and see what this feels like. So, like, rhythm, house music groove, at least in my opinion, is all about subtle variation, right? You basically want to keep one simple idea, but then add little, you know, bits of salt and pepper, little bits of spices here and there to kind of make things feel a little bit more, you know, alive and interesting, so it's less boring. So I'll hit duplicate region one more time, and maybe what I'll do is, for this final time, I'll take this here, and I will duplicate it over there. And what I'll do is I'll delete this one. I'll make this one a little bit louder. And let's see what that feels like now, as now a whole kind of rhythmic loop. I'm not in love with what that did, so maybe I'll actually just copy this over completely. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. So let's hear that in full cycle again. Cool. So that feels like a nice full groove now. It's nice. It's not too busy, but it has definitely, you know, variation to the basic down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up of house music. It's got some swing. It's got a little bit of feel. So maybe what I can add now is one of my favorites, which is this rim. And it allows us to add, and again, just another little bit of variation of feel in the rhythm. So maybe what I'll do is I'll almost have the rim like respond to the snares. Oh, excuse me. I think that's all I'll actually do, is I'll just put the rim on every other hi-hat. Now the reason for doing that is so that it's almost like I'm adding a subtle tonal variation to the hi-hat itself. But it's not actually the hi-hat that I'm adding it to. It's that moment in time rhythmically, right? So that we get a little bit more sense of chatter going on tonally. So maybe also for this final, this final part where we come around, I'll actually throw the rim right on there too. Cool. So I'm digging that groove for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and save that so some kind of disaster doesn't happen. We'll call this
Freedom.
Labs episode 1. All right. Now I'm finding I want my kick drum to be a little louder, a little more dominant. So I'm just gonna turn it up. Turn up that release a little. Cool. So the next thing I want to get into now is, believe it or not, I'm actually not going to start with bassline next. I want to first talk about using chords, because one of the things I think that distinguishes house music is its kind of relationship to jazz a lot of the times. So what I'll do is drag in the analog, and I have to apologize. I think we are having some technical difficulties real quick. And let's keep going along. So I'll call these house chords. And I have to apologize because I think my screen setting was not adjusted so that you guys could see what I was actually doing. So I'm very sorry about that. I guess I've just been talking into the void here. So let's actually look at then, if you guys haven't been able to see what I've been doing. So, right, the swing that I was talking about, right, is these little portions right here where they overlap, or where they skip, off of the 16th note, and then these little rim shots are, as you can see, velocity, and anything that's darker is where I've applied velocity to it. Let me just keep those locked in. Okay, cool. And so let's keep plugging along. Very sorry for that. First episode, you'll have to bear with me a little. Alright, cool. So that's our groove, and now I'm going to jump out to chords. So typically with house music, we're dealing a lot in like minor keys, more often than not. All right, and so in terms of house music's relation to jazz music and stuff like that, what's very common to use is what we call like extended chords rather than just normal position minor and major chords. And so all an extended chord is you're adding an extra note on top of your basic chord structure. So like let's take just a basic minor chord. Let's take C sharp. Let's also try to take something that doesn't sound terrible. Cool. Cool. So let's go like this. A little look around. All right. It's very common to start with the little minor chord on the downbeat. But what an extended chord does is it takes these three notes and it adds another note on top. So another minor third interval. And you can hear that if we were to play two chords, you'll hear the difference between these, the basic minor one and the extended one. Right, we hear, those are the things our ears are drawn towards. So I'm a big fan of actually like intertwining these two usages. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a little basic groove just using these. Now, something that you have to keep in mind, right, is that once you have swing going on in here, right, you have to make sure that any notes that overlap with those areas in the other parts of the beat also have swing applied to them. So this right here, right, if we highlight both of these regions, you can see there's an overlap between this hi-hat and this chord. But if we look a little bit closer, right, there you can see there's a pretty big difference between where they're landing. So these, we need to shift over to here. Now, of course, another way that you can do that without dragging it is just to very simply apply the groove pool, which we've already done, right? So if we just take that and we hit commit, you'll see that that shifts over now. And it'll be perfectly in time. Cool. So I'm a big fan of more like minimalistic approaches to house music. That doesn't mean that other approaches are wrong. This is just my preference. And so what I'm going to kind of first do is show you how you can use very basic and simple and sparse amounts of chords to kind of change the feel, right? So when we're using these two chords, which again it's really the same chord, it's just C sharp minor and then C sharp minor 7, then what you can do is you can actually change where the chords are landing to change, again, emphasis, right, and accentuate the groove differently. So I already talked about that before, about this idea that we can use different instruments to layer them at different times to create a different feeling of the groove. So what if we were to take this off the downbeat and move it right there. A little more playful than this. Not that one is necessarily better or worse, but I think that this second one that I just kind of created by simply moving this over here has a little bit more pop to it. It makes me, it has a little bit even more like maybe a bit of emotional nuance to it in addition to groove, which is cool. Now, one thing is also is that the first one that we had was going down, up, and this one's going up, down. So even by just, watch this, changing that relationship, we can even change the feel. And maybe we don't need to make a decision between the two. So I'll show you what I mean. So versus, and then versus. So what I'm thinking is I like both of them. And I'm a big fan of like what we would call call and response, and kind of an idea that talks within itself. So what maybe I'll do is I'll go down, up the first time and up, down the second time. And when I say down, up, and up, down, all I'm referring to is a lower note to a higher note. So, and then a higher note to a lower note. So let's see what that sounds like. And now what you can do is, at least what I like to do is in the same way that I varied, you know, this groove a little bit towards the end with these snares, right? You can take larger phrases like this. And what I mean by larger is very simply, it happens over a longer period of time, right? And you can kind of add variation within there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, just at the end here, do some kind of cool little chord flourish. So I'm going to listen and maybe see if I hear something. That's kind of cool. I got to hear it in the context of the whole thing. And again, I'm going to need to shift this over a little bit to make sure that it's landing at a position where it is swinging, since it's a 16th note. And in this groove, all my 16th notes are swinging. I don't really like that because of the way it comes around. So let me see if I can come up with something else. Maybe I'll switch these positions. And I'll just do maybe just a little walk down, basically. So we go. Let's see what that sounds like coming around now. That's cool. I want to add a little bit of attitude to this. So let me see if I can do a little bit of like a roll, kind of. So that's actually too fast. You can't even hear it rolling. Ah, yes, I like that. And maybe I'll take this guy out. Yeah, I dig that. So my philosophy behind house music, as you can probably tell, and as I've been saying, is that you keep something simple, you repeat it, and then you subtly change things over the sense of the cycle to make sure that you keep a sense of continuity, right? And kind of also what ends up happening is each time these little phrases at the end here happen, and also in the, this area, it kind of creates in the listener a sense of anticipation and justifies a sense of change. So it also is going to actually make your arrangement work better. So if you have these little moments where they're like these, almost, I like to call them almost like summaries or like accentuations, of your overall groove of just a little like a flourish, right? A little cherry on top. Then what ends up happening is it brings you logically into the next part. And so if we were to even approach this from a very basic standpoint of, arrangement, which I'm not going to play for you a whole house music arrangement because that would kind of be a waste of time in this context, because under normal circumstances, this would be the arrangement that I go for, right? I go for 30 seconds of just beat as opposed to 15 seconds. But let's just listen to 15 seconds to see that way that it develops. So you can kind of, with these little flourishes, almost imagine in your head, like, oh, maybe some kind of string comes in here, or maybe then like the bass line comes in or something like that, right? So I want to also point out like a really basic kind of structural arrangement tool that you can use in house music, and that's just one of my all-time favorites, and that's the sustained string, right? Where you basically just take the root note of the key that you're playing, and you just literally sustain it. You usually play it pretty high. Right, turn off loop. Right, so I said I was working in C sharp minor, so what I would do is just throw in a little C sharp. That's a terrible sound, right? That's not actually sounding like a string at all. So to get to that kind of house music string sound, it's actually very, very easy. First of all, you want to make sure that your filter's open so that you get high octave harmonics. And then what you want to do is you just want to detune these two oscillators. So if you're working on a synth that the preset only gives you one oscillator, you want to choose the same wave shape, which usually for this type of sound is going to be a sawtooth wave. And then you want to detune them. And that's too much detuning. That works nicely. So I'll turn that down. building this out for you almost in the way that I would approach building out a track, right? So I like to like kind of compose chronologically with house music, where I'll just as if like I'm transitioning into the track from another track, but just live. That's definitely not how everyone does it. That's just one of the ways that I like to do it. So if there are other ways that you do it, by all means, that's totally cool. So what I'll do is I'll now think about adding in a bass line, right? So. And in terms of making bass lines in Ableton, I like using the wavetable synth. Don't know why, I just find that it feels a little bit more plump a lot of the time than analog. Could just be in my head, but I definitely prefer it a little bit. Now, when it comes to making a bass line, what I'm about to say is definitely not going to be that helpful, but then I'm going to clarify it. So I, like to just kind of try to hear it in my head. And I like to try to, I make sure that it's something that makes sense in the context of the music. And so, when I say, oh, just hear it in your head, maybe you're like, well, I don't hear it in my head. I can't hear it in my head. So that's not helpful, right? But sometimes a good way to try to do that is to just keep playing the leading in moment to it over and over again until something kind of comes up and you maybe just hear the first couple notes, right? And you're like, oh, I can hear it dipping down or something like that, right? So I kind of got a little something going on in my head. I'm going to try to see if I can get it out quick. And let's see. So for this type of bass line, I'm going to want to use a lower frequency filter. So let's see. Usually I'm starting on the root note most of the time. So that's an easy one at least. I'm going to take the release time, turn it down. I want to get a really deep round sound. So I'm going to just play with this for a little bit. All right, so right off the bat, I'm going to try to make sure that these syncopated notes are lining up with the other syncopated notes in the groove. Otherwise, it's going to kind of throw off my sense of timing. So I'll take these high notes and just make sure that they're shifted into time right here. Well, this shouldn't actually be shifted because it's on an eighth note. Silly me. This one should. So let me maybe open up right here. Try to find. Yeah, here we go. So again, what I could do is drag this one over because the Ableton is smart and it'll lock it into its groove time. And this, of course, also needs to be swung. So I'll just drag this over here. And you can hear how that makes a huge difference between having them swung versus not swung. Something just sounds wrong when you do it that way. And the reason it sounds wrong is because it's actually using a different musical motion, rhythm. And so now the bass line is really popping off and swinging. That's nice. All right. Let's see. So here's one right there. Maybe I'll not jump the octave this time. Alright, so now we're starting to get somewhere. I'm thinking shift this over. Kind of hearing that for some reason. Let's have a look. Could be crazy. Yeah, I don't know about that. I'll probably come down here. So I like that bass line. Now I might look into trying to just shape that sound real quick. And now if we, so it's real fast, I'll just do that. Coming to the end of our time here. Since it was the first episode, since there was a little bit of that, mix up with some of the technical stuff, we can go over a little bit, more. But some of the sound design stuff that I kind of breezed through today, we'll definitely focus on going forward in some of the later episodes. And I think the best thing to do would be kind of to take this track and keep building from it the next time to show you like how you can expand it, how you can play with different ideas, how it could completely change the music stuff, the musicality of it, and go on maybe more of a journey over the course of the song. the last thing I do want to talk about is, trying to understand why my brain might have gravitated towards doing this type of bass line, right? Like I did hear this in my head, but the thing is that there's a logic to music, right? So as much as I could be like, oh, this was just, I was inspired to do this. The fact of the matter is something about the groove itself made my brain, my heart, whatever, my soul, be drawn towards creating this type of rhythm. So let's look at real quick the relationship between what's happening in the bass line and what's happening elsewhere in the music, okay? So in the very first moment, right, my bass note overlaps, each of my bass notes overlaps with another note in the song, right? So right off the bat, that's actually a good thing. So there's a real sense of like locked in synchronicity. But now what happens next is that two of my bass notes actually don't overlap with anything else in my song. And so they're filling in that space. And so it's making the groove just chatter and jump a little bit more, right? Remember that at the start of this episode, what we talked about was that rhythm is not only when something is played, it's also how something is played and the tone at which it's played, right? Or the tone of the instrument that plays it, rather. So in this case, my kick is talking to my bass, which then talks to my hat and my chord, right? And then is talking, and also the bass happens to be there anyhow. And then it returns to kind of talking to my bass, which then comes back to my kick. So I would think of this as like a small musical conversation between this moment, this moment, this moment, and this moment, right? And we could see that right here, there's the kick and the clap. Right here, there's just the bass. Right here, there's the hat, the bass, and the chord. Right here, there's just the bass, and then we're back to the kick. Right? So you get this kind of cool, subtle, rhythmic kind of melange occurring. And so if we look across the rest of this bass line, you'll see the bass note overlaps, the bass note overlaps, the bass note overlaps, the bass note overlaps. The bass note overlaps everywhere except for these little spots. And so what ends up happening with this, right, is that for the most part, it sounds like it's really melded together with my groove. And then it also, at these little moments, is adding something that wasn't quite there. And so one cool way to hear this would be to actually mute all of the notes that are doing their own thing. And by that I mean notes that aren't involved in the overall groove that has already been established. And so, here, we'll do that right here. Sorry. Let's select all these notes again. And so now, you can hear, it's almost like the bass line isn't actually doing anything, It's just like some extra thing that's there, but it's not doing any work. It's only when I add these other notes that are filling in all those gaps when we start to feel something happen. When I take them out, nothing's really happening. Maybe now if you don't add a little bit more low end to it. I think that pretty much draws the end of the topic of this first episode to a close. And so on that note, I do, in the spirit of, what we got going on right now with this, I'm sorry, completely butchered that. So what we're doing with each of these episodes of 343 Labs TV is to each episode we're going to announce, we have some like special giveaways that we're doing that forever anyone who tuned in is going to get like a little prize. And so, you know, they're going to be things like subscriptions to, you know, loop services or sample packs, or maybe even like free classes here at the school, or other things, you know, like subscriptions to, you know, synth plugin packs and stuff like that. So while I'm waiting for that, I'll just kind of let this play out a little bit more. And maybe I'll just keep fidgeting with it a little bit and, you know, throw a few more things in there. And maybe just so we really can crank it, I will throw on a limiter onto the master and just smash it. So, a couple little tricks that I did there at the end, right, to just, you know, make it feel more alive, add a little bit of nuance to the arrangement, and we're going to go over that over the course of the next few episodes. But now we have the winners. So the first place winner, who's going to be taking home, or I guess downloading, however you would probably say that, the Arturia V Collection 7 is going to be John Hume, with the username HumeDini. So congratulations, John. Second place winner, who's going to be taking home a Beatport Loop Cloud 6-month subscription, which is really cool. You're going to have access to tons of different loops and samples and stuff like that, is Francisco Atencio. I think your username was J Francisco. And the third place winner, who's winning a 343 Labs online workshop with yours truly, so I'm very sorry about that, man, is Gregory Fraser, username Greg Fraser. So again, first place winner for the Arturia V Collection is John Hume. Second place winner for the Beatport Loop Cloud 6-month subscription is Francisco Atencio. And third place winner for the online workshop with 343 Labs with me is Gregory Fraser. So thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to be doing this every week for the rest of the month. I hope that you are all, you know, staying safe in these very crazy times that we live in. And, you know, I hope that you can just use some of the energy to make beautiful music that can help positively impact the world. So with that being said, you know, it was a pleasure having you this first time around, and hopefully I'll see you next week.
Freedom.